Hey everybody, this is Josh,
Hello, and this is Dean.
and here we are again with another installment of Finding an Agent. And we'll start off by asking everyone to like and subscribe and leave us some comments. And with that, we're going to
Give us some
turn
thumbs up.
to, yeah, thumbs ups are good. Thumbs downs are bad. All right, so we're going to talk about what's been going on this week, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what I've been reading. So we'll start off with Dean. Dean, what you got going?
Well, I got another query letter response, and that was a rejection. This one I sent, the query letter I sent, according to I keep an Excel file that basically lists each agency I've sent to and includes things like their website, their location, and notes about what they wanted. This one I sent in January of this year, so it was pretty early on. And this is before I had started sending out snail mail submissions, but interestingly, this agency apparently only accepts snail mail submissions. So I had prepared a letter with a self-addressed stamped envelope and sent that in January, along with the first 10 pages of my work. And they said their response time was going to be 2 to 3 months, and it was more like 5 to 6 months. The response letter was fairly, I won't hold it up for too long, but was fairly short and basically just said, didn't feel like it was right for us, and thank you very much. And that was pretty much it.
Back in January when you originally sent this one?
Yeah, with January, I've got the exact date. It was January the 16th is when I generated the Microsoft Word file for the query letter. It was not much information, just 10 pages, which I don't know. It seems like they'd want more than that, but at any rate, they just wanted 10 pages and a very short query letter. And it was basically my stock query letter that kind of gives a very short synopsis of what the story's about. And they wanted a little background on me. So I talked about being a lawyer and dealing with issues in family law court, which I do, and kind of that being some of the inspiration for the Matriarchs novel.
Yeah, that's one of the issues with sending a query like that. You send it back in January, and now here we are. Well, now we're in August, and so you kind of forget about.
It's almost 8 months, so
yeah, you kind of forget that those are even hanging out there, and then you get something back like that.
Yeah, it's like getting a Christmas present, but in reverse. So at any rate, that's that. You got to keep just chugging along, and hopefully my luck will change.
Do you have any idea how many you still have pending? Like how many queries out?
Yeah, I need to try and piece that together. I've got my query letters and I've just been kind of stacking them up. I need to probably go through and check off and see, but I've probably gotten, I'd say 10 to 15 responses, rejections, and I've probably sent out 25 to 30, 30 is probably optimistic, about 25 query letters.
Yeah, still, that's a pretty good ratio. That's some, good number of responses back.
Yeah, it's Rome wasn't built in a day, so it is what it is.
Yeah. Well, I guess with that, then we'll kind of turn to what I've been reading, because the last week's been pretty busy for me on the legal front, so I haven't really had a chance to work on a lot of writing stuff. So I do try to keep reading, so that way, got something going into the brain. Hopefully, by osmosis, I'm learning to be a better writer, even if I don't have time to write every day. And so I've still been reading Stephen King's Everything's Eventual. I like reading short stories, as I've mentioned in the past. They're kind of little single serving units of storytelling, and I can usually read through one in a night or maybe a couple of nights. And so recently, some of the stories that I've read out of this book, this is the one that I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, where I read the story, The Man in the Black Suit. And I really think if you like reading short stories, if you haven't read Stephen King's Everything's Eventual, then I would recommend it. This came out in 2002, I believe. And in my opinion, it's one of the last really good short story collections from Stephen King, where he still kind of feels like older Stephen King a little bit before he kind of transitioned into newer, more politically active Stephen King. And this book's got, in addition to The Man in the Black Suit, most everything in this was written in the 90s, and a lot of it's pretty well identifiably written in the 90s. But it's got some good stuff in it. After The Man in the Black Suit, I'm trying to flip over, there was a short story. And a lot of these I would say are not even particularly horror. There's one that I read called All That You Love Will Be Carried Away. And that's a pretty interesting short story about a guy that he's like a traveling salesman, and he's contemplating committing suicide. And he checks into a hotel out in the middle of nowhere in the Midwest. He keeps a little notebook where when he stops at truck stops or what have you, and he goes to the bathroom, if he sees like some interesting graffiti on the wall, he writes down the quotes. So he keeps a little notebook or a little journal full of interesting graffiti quotes that he's read off of bathroom walls, which I thought was kind of funny. And I also thought it was kind of interesting that some of the settings, Stephen King, I guess he tends to revisit them. So like this book was it's set in the 90s, but it's set in the Midwest. But it's interesting because that's a physical setting that he goes back to in the novella 1922, which came out more recently and then was made into a Netflix movie where it's about a farmer who kills his wife, and then his son kind of goes on to be like a Depression era outlaw. And very similar setting as to the short story. And so I thought it was kind of interesting to see like that setting kind of come up again in Stephen King's work. I guess he kind of liked that idea. But this story, I wouldn't necessarily call it horrific. Doesn't have any type of a speculative element to it at all. It's just a pretty good short story about a guy that's kind of down on his luck and kind of his thought process at the end. And it's pretty dark, but kind of goes into, I guess, what you would imagine anyone would be working through mentally as they prepare to end their life. And then the next story after that is called The Death of Jack Hamilton. And again, this story is not one that I would consider to be a horror story. It doesn't have a speculative element to it at all. It's kind of based in reality. And this one is about John Dillinger, and Jack Hamilton was a cohort of John Dillinger. And it's written from the perspective of Homer Van Meter, which was another cohort of Dillingers. They all kind of ran together, and they were kind of caught up in some activities right around the time that they all died. I think they all died like in 34. And that was when Hoover's FBI was like really tracking down a lot of these Depression era gangsters. And they were, it's the era of the Public Enemies and all of that. And the death of Jack Hamilton is a real event. He was shot and he kind of lingered for a few days. And this story is just about that. It's about these outlaws on the run. You've got Dillinger and Hamilton and Homer Van Meter. And it's about a week where they're trying to get away from the law and keep this guy alive after he's been gut shot in a shootout with the cops. Again, not speculative, not horror, but a good short story, especially if you like gangsters and crime stories and stuff like that. That's kind of what I've been up to.
Well, okay, and I was listening to what you were saying, and I haven't read any of those stories. But the salesman story, the first one you mentioned, it sounds like it's like a middle-aged guy basically about to commit suicide or thinking about committing suicide.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting because if you look at the suicide rates for middle-aged men, they shoot up like starting around the 40s, age 40. I think suicide rates for men go way up. So that story kind of would touch on a vein, or, is commenting on something real or a real phenomena, it sounds like. And I don't know how it ends, but I thought that was interesting that, he would touch on that. And I'm guessing Stephen King was probably in his 40s when he wrote that, would be my guess.
Yeah, let's see. Stephen King, I think he was born in 47. So yeah, he probably would have been around 50 or maybe a little younger when he wrote it. Um, yeah, it's interesting. I won't give away the end, but there's definitely a lot of rationalization and equivocating that goes on, like in the last, uh, at least potentially the last few hours of this guy's life, where he's really kind of sorting through things, and it's kind of that situation where it's like, he's kind of going through the reasons why he should or shouldn't, and you kind of get the feeling that he's not really sure that he wants to do this, but and I won't say how it ends or anything, but yeah, it's pretty interesting. Like, I always find Stephen King's, when he's not getting off on a soapbox or lecturing me on politics, I enjoy Stephen King's thought process. And that's one of the things that I've always liked about his writing, is that he writes in a way that's very similar to the way that I think. Like, my internal dialogue is very similar to what I read in his writings. And so listening to this guy like sort through his thoughts.
Do you know do you know who Stephen King's literary influences are, like who he read that really influenced him?
He talks about that in his book on writing, and I can't remember all of them. I know a couple of them were H.P. Lovecraft,
I
and
can see
then
that.
yeah, and then Robert Bloch. And it's interesting because Robert Bloch, who wrote Psycho, he was actually very heavily influenced by Lovecraft as well. And I believe there was even, I think, very briefly, some overlap and some correspondence between Robert Bloch and H.P. Lovecraft. And this would have been right before Lovecraft died, and probably before Robert Bloch started publishing. So very early in his life, Bloch was, I guess, in contact with Lovecraft, and then he went on to write Psycho and other things. And honestly, I've never read anything by Robert Bloch, but I've seen the movie Psycho. But I believe Bloch and Lovecraft were two of the ones that he mentioned, and I can't recall the others. I'd have to look.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've always just heard that, you should look and see who an author's, who they were influenced by, to kind of get an idea for how they think.
Yeah, with King, I can see some Lovecraftian influence in terms of his monsters or his speculative elements, but his dialogue and his thought process and all of that is obviously very different than Lovecraft.
Yeah.
Which is good, because I've read some Lovecraft stuff and it doesn't really appeal to me. I guess it's a little too literary for me. I kind of enjoy stuff like Stephen King that's a little bit more lowbrow.
Right. Yeah, Stephen King definitely feels like a child of the 60s, or the, a baby boomer, hippie type thought processes, I think.
Yeah, I would think so too. But anyhow, that's pretty much what I've been up to. And so if anybody out there is looking for some good Stephen King short stories, I would definitely check out Everything's Eventual. Like I say, this book's been out for about 20 years. It's nothing new, but if you haven't read it, it's worth reading. All right. Well, do you have anything else that you wanted to hit on?
I think that's it.
Okay. Well, folks, we're going to sign off for this week. Hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll catch you next time.
Take care, everybody.
Sorry, I got to start over.
I don't know why that's backwards. It's really weird.
Shit. All right.
We'll get better at this as we go, I guess. And
what's going into the sausage here?
There's definitely some reflection off my head. Yeah, I may end up in federal prison.